10,000 years ago, the city of Ythryn soared above the planet that would later be called Athas. Back then, the earth was green and good, yielding nutrition and sustaining life. But floating cities like Ythryn were sucking up nutrients by the continent full, stripping whole nations of nutritive topsoil with their defiler magic, drying up whole seas in order to power their floating city. And on one specific occasion, the lich who ruled that city, Athas, decided to perform an experiment. That experiment proved disastrous for the city of Ythryn. It plummeted to the ground, crashed and was buried, and lay dormant for tens of centuries. 5 centuries ago, however, halfling explorers discovered the remains of the city, began tampering with it, and awakened certain elements, while damaging others. The storage of life energies, which were the batteries for Ythryn, began to leak their fecund essence into the sands, imbuing them with the enchantment of life, and very quickly producing the jungle which the characters come across, and which we reskinned in the last video as the Caves of Hunger. Now it is the PCs who come across and explore this ancient city, one which, if the PCs are unique and mysterious, is their origin. Welcome to PhD&D, everyone. I'm Dr. Bowers, and this is part 8 of 8, the last part of our series, Rime of the Dark Sun, in which we take the Wizards of the Coast adventure, Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frost Maiden, and reskin it as a Dark Sun adventure. In this video, we're covering the lost city of Etheren, and I have some good news for you. The good news, or at least if you're lazy like me, is that we do not need to reskin very much of this chapter. We are telling the story of the player characters discovering an ancient magical city that was floating on air, powered by defiler magic, whose likeness is the explanation for why Athas became a desert. So when the player characters come across it, of course it is filled with weird magical things that are non-Athasian. Of course it has wizardly towers devoted to necromancy and conjuration. Of course it has magical artifacts. Of course it has living spells and magen, those artifacts that go about doing programmed duties. At the level of detail, I would simply change the couple of devils that are in this city, as well as the night hags that are located in one of these spaces, into magen, or some version of like guardian magen. Maybe they've gone haywire and that's why they are attacking the PCs, or why they behave as they do. But this would just be a small change that we need to make in order to keep the world consistent with our prohibition on extraplanar beings other than elementals. Now, in addition to that, we are going to use the city of Etheren to complete the personal quest arc of any PC who, because they were unique and mysterious, were seeking personal knowledge. I mentioned before that instead of prohibiting any of your players from having a non-Athasian lineage for their player character, just let them be a Warforged or a Fairy or a Dhampir or whatever. I said then that we would work into the story the fact that they were unique and mysterious, and here's where that part of the story pays off. The demi-lich Athas, who is all that remains of the lich that used to rule Etheren, has been gradually and feebly attempting to revive the ancient city. His first step was to repopulate it, and using a kind of magical genetic laboratory, he grew new citizens. New citizens based on biological tissue samples and magical flavorings of old. And when those experiments had properly gestated and turned into infants which were floating in tanks, Athas tried to use magic to accelerate their age. But there was a mistake. Instead of accelerating their age in time, he changed their position in space. He teleported the infants miles away, maybe over 100 miles away. And those infants were the PCs, or at least the PCs who are unique and mysterious due to their lineage. If they are unique and mysterious, it's because they were grown, bred, and then teleported from the lost city of Etheren. They come from a lost age thousands upon thousands of years ago when there were such fantastic creatures. And if, as I recommended, those unique and mysterious PCs were found with some kind of artifact on them as infants, that artifact is in fact a piece of the nether oak from Etheren. You can just work that into this chapter as written, and all you need to do is add a kind of genetic experimentation chamber in the layer of Athas. Now, as for Athas himself, he is still dangerous, but not quite in the same way. When the player characters show up to Etheren, Athas will be wandering the city and has a chance to encounter them. And he will be interested in the PCs, immediately recognizing them as the results of his experimentation gone haywire. He will want to welcome them, but at the same time he will be skeptical as to their worth. Are they worthy to be citizens of Etheren? He knows that they are strangers, and he expects as much. But if they conduct themselves foolishly, without prudence or tact, he may decide to attack. Otherwise, however, Athas will greet the PCs, and here is where the real conflict comes in. After introducing himself and talking a little bit about the city, Larthus will invite the PCs, insist that the PCs stay forever, and help him to rebuild the city. The PCs can bluff, they can stall, they can bide their time, but eventually it will become clear that they and Larthus have different goals. The PCs should not want to stay in the city of Ythryn. Or if they do, I guess that's one way to end the campaign. But assuming they don't, there is a conflict. And the resolution of that conflict, combined with the PC's return back to Tyr, will constitute the end of our adventure. Now here's the thing, a demi-lich is a challenge rating 18 or 20 when it's in its lair, and I assume that Larthus is always in his lair. But the player characters are going to be level 9 or maybe 10 at the most. So in order to make this conflict beatable, you'll want to either nerf Larthus' stat block, or maybe incorporate some sort of item-based weakness, where if only the player characters have a few artifacts that they can find around Etheren, then they get a massive bonus to attacks and damage when they're facing him. Kind of like how in Curse of Strahd, the Vampire Lord is unbeatable until you find those MacGuffins. But that overall is going to be the shape of this chapter. The player characters will arrive and explore this alien, ancient, magical city which is draped in moss and jungle, not draped in frost and snow, remember, and eventually learn not only of the city's relationship to Athas, but of their relationship to the city. And when they have to face up against Larthus, it will be this nice storytelling moment where they reaffirm that no, they are friends to the people of Tyr. They do not want to betray them and pursue some selfish, inhuman, defiling agenda. It's an opportunity for heroism. And that'll be the campaign. At the conclusion, you could allow the PCs to travel back in time, 10,000 years, back to before Athas was Athas and there were defiler cities floating about the planet. Or you could have them return home triumphant, full of goodies that they found in the city and in the jungle. Heroic explorers coming home to help the people of Tyr rebuild their newly liberated city. Now, given the setting, player characters should not be able to interact with scrolls or spellbooks that they find in Etheren, which would mean that the ending where you summon a Tarrasque would be inaccessible. However, I would just replace the scroll of summoning a Tarrasque with some kind of device, a device with buttons and levers or something, which could be activated by a player character that makes a history check or an arcana check or something like that. It would have the same effect, and that's one way to incorporate that ending as a possibility if you're really wedded to it. Now, that's what I have to say about the city of Etheren and how to conclude this adventure and what to change in it, but we'll take a quick breeze through the actual pages for the sake of thoroughness. Let's go! Character advancement, it says they should be 9th. I would say 9th or above. Really, they're going up against a demi-lich, and how you handle that is flexible? But I don't think there's much of a ceiling here. If you wanted them to have a bunch of random encounters and they get bumped up to 15th, that's no big deal. I already explained our version of the Fall of Ythryn. The denizens of the necropolis are the same. This is a wonderful place to illustrate how psionics and magic are actually different. These weird living spells that move around and these magen, that's what magic is about, not stuff that the PCs can do. The encounters are the same. On a roll of 56 to 60, we'll have the Big B's hands, not the Cult Fanatics. On a roll of 61 to 65, we'll have the Spitting Mimics, not the Cold Light Walkers. On a roll of 66 to 70, we'll have the Gargoyles, not the other stuff. And the rest will be the same. The magical effects can stay the same, as can the Arcane Blight. The Arcane Blight is a nice mechanical way to illustrate the defiling effects of magic from the player character's perspective, even. The Rite of the Arcane Octad will keep. Indeed, most of this will keep. You can see here that the necropolis is illustrated as being entombed in ice, but of course we're going to change all of that to greenery and jungle, and we'll say that there are shafts of light shining down on it from the cracks in the cavern above. Ythryn lore, we can keep it the same, just adapt it to the narrative that I provided before. In the print version of this, the 2 pages that illustrate the necropolis close up are on the same spread. Keep the Chain Lightning Stadium. Keep the towers, prisons, spires, and House of the Arcane. Keep the library, keep the Arboretum. You might want to change Kingsport to something other than a penguin, something that's not an Arctic creature. It basically could be anything that you would find in either a desert or a jungle, or what you might imagine to be something that a wizard would conjure. I guess technically it could be a penguin, but I would change it. Make it a big ladybug. Anyway, the wellspring, the towers, the hall, and the observatory are the same. Normally, I would put the ban on the slods, but because this is supposed to be a weird alien magical city, we're going to keep them. They don't come from another dimension, just the distant magical past. The menagerie we keep, the theater we keep, the tower of necromancy we keep. And all of the spire of Larthus stays the same except for Y19Q. This is the room where the player characters will find all the evidence that they themselves were genetically engineered and grown, and it is also where Larthus, if he still needs to, will deliver the exposition to complete that particular story and personal arc. It's also a wonderful place for Larthus to reveal his intent for the player characters to stay, and for the player characters to refuse and make their stand. As I mentioned before, this tower is the same. The obelisk, the Tower of Illusion, the Ythryn Mythalar, the tower, the hall, this is all the same. You barely need to change any of this because in our story, as well as in the original, it is a weird alien city from the past. The fact that it has magic and the rest of our setting does not have magic just makes it better. I sometimes wonder if someone designed a Dark Sun campaign and then they brought it to the heads at Wizards of the Coast and Wizards was like, no, let's make it into a winter thing, and that's the origin of this because it's all so perfect. Anyway, I mentioned that there are the 3 different endings. They could press the Godzilla button and summon a Tarrasque, they could travel back in time to before Athas was a desert, or they could return home as heroes with some neat things that they found both in the city as well as in the jungle. And that's basically our campaign, Rime of the Dark Sun. I hope you enjoyed this series, and I hope that it's useful for you, and I am proud and happy for anyone to use my conversion as the basis for a more detailed Dark Sun campaign. Anyway, this is not the last of the reskins that I'm going to do on this channel. I'm going to do a few others, and I'm also going to continue to release on a weekly basis little videos on the underlying philosophy of D&D and also how to have a more engaging and imaginative game. So hit that bell icon, don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and thank you very, very much for watching this series. I'll see you soon.